All right. Intlanextia intonatio, que su sol sea brillante. May your sun be brilliant. My name is Juan Tejeda. I, along with my wife, Anissa Onofre, are the co-owners and publishers of Aztlan Libre Press. And we're so glad to be here today celebrating our 14th book publication in this first live virtual book launch. Aztlan Libre Press is based out of Yanaguana, San Antonio, Tejaslan. We're super excited to be doing this virtual book launch for writing 50 years, más o menos, amongst the Gringos by Dr. Cintli. You see the book cover over here. And these backgrounds are some of the other books that we've published over the course of the last 10 or 11 years that we've been in operation as Aztlan Libre Press. So thank you for joining us. And I want to thank all of our guests that are here with us today. Also, we have some very special guests that I will be introducing them individually as we work our way through the plática. But right now I want to mention that our special guests are, besides the author Roberto Dr. Cintli Rodriguez, we have Tania Pacheco. We also, you're coming from, she's in Arizona right now, I think Tucson, is that correct, Tania?
Arizona, yes. I'm I'm excited. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us.
Dr. Cintli, you're where at right now?
In Teotihuacan, in Mexico, right outside of, about an hour outside of Mexico City. Most people know it where all the big pyramids are, you know?
Yeah, Teotihuacan. And we have Guadalupe Carrasco-Cardona coming from, is that LA, Lupe?
Yes, I'm in East LA.
All right. And then we have Dr. Lilliana Patricia Saldaña, and she's originally from here, from Yanaguana also, and San Antonio, Texas. Hello, Liliana.
Hello, saludos.
Saludos. Glad to have everybody here and glad to have everybody that's joining us on the Aztlan Libre Press Facebook page live. First of all, I want to thank some other people that were involved in the publication of this book, besides my wife, Anissa Onofre, who did a lot of the technical work and the layout and design for the book. I also want to thank Dr. Irene Vasquez from the University of New Mexico, who wrote the foreword for the book. And also I want to thank Dr. Jenny Luna, who, along with Lupe Carrasco-Cardona and Liliana Saldaña, were three of the educators that Dr. Cintli and I asked if they would participate in this publication and would develop and create questions and writing prompts and activities for the end of each decade of Dr. Cintli's writings in the book, because there are a couple of purposes, if you will, for us publishing this book. I think it was my wife, Anissa, years ago that had the idea. She loved Dr. Cintli's writings, as do I, and I've known Roberto Dr. Cintli now since I think probably the late 70s or early 80s, when he was working and writing for Lowrider magazine. I met him here in San Antonio, and I've always appreciated his voice and his writings, and we have many of his books. And I think when Anissa read the Ex en la Raza, and then we had the Amoxli Ex Codex, she said, you know, we ought to publish, I think she said first, you know, because the Ex en la Raza was out of print. She said, we ought to republish the Ex en la Raza. And then we said, yeah, maybe we can do a combination of different of Cintli's books that are out of print. And then it evolved over the years into thinking, let's do something special. Let's do a retrospective of his writings, you know, almost 50 years worth of his best journalistic as well as scholarly writings. And so that was the premise that about 4 years ago, then we asked Dr. Cintli if he would be interested in working on this project. And he began then, I think it was about 4 years ago, he agreed, and he began then looking through his extensive repertoire of writings and making initial selections. So I want to talk a little bit before we get into the meat of the matter here on the book. And we're going to have some readings and discussions with Dr. Cintli about some of the readings from the book, and also we're going to integrate then the other people that are here and ask them about their participation and the process that they took in their collaboration on this book. And then we're going to get into a general sort of discussion and more readings by Dr. Cintli, and a general discussion on his writing career, his academic career, and this book. I think that those people that are watching right now on our Aztlan Libre Press Facebook, you can make comments on the Aztlan Libre Press Facebook. And my wife, Anissa, is going to be monitoring that, and she'll be relaying some of those questions to me, or comments. And hopefully, maybe even at the end, we're scheduled to go about an hour, a little over an hour today. Maybe at the end, we'll have a little time for some of the questions that the public asks. And of course, if you're interested, right now, we have the book, Writing 50 Years, Más o Menos Amongst the Gringos, which we're featuring today by Dr. Cintli, is we have it at a discount price on our website at aztlanlibrepress.com. So you can go there and purchase it throughout the month of November at a price of $25 plus $5 shipping. But the regular price is $35. So besides wanting to do a retrospective of almost 50 years of Dr. Cintli's best journalistic and academic writings, we also wanted to make this book a sort of a textbook reader for Chicanx, Indigenous and ethnic studies, and also communications and journalism courses for college, university students and high school students. And that's why we invited the three educators, two of which are with us today, Lupe and Lilliana, to write questions and writing prompts and activities for the students at the end of each decade, beginning the 70s, 80s, 90s through 2020. So that's the whole sort of purpose and premise of this book. And we're so glad that we put it out. We launched it on October 1st, and we had a couple of in-person national book launches, one here in San Antonio, one at Tucson, and this is our first live virtual book launch. So again, thank everybody for being here. And I wanted to start with Dr. Cintli and Tania. Tania is a yoga instructor, but she's also an editor, a translator, and she worked on Dr. Cintli's book from the beginning. And so Dr. Cintli and Tania, maybe you can start us off by telling us, after I asked you, said, go through your stuff and make an initial selection. What was the process that you went through, Dr. Cintli, and what people did you get involved? And Tania, then you can tell us a little bit about what you did as part of this book in the early stages. Dr. Cintli.
Yeah, well, I've always been writing, always. And when you and Anissa asked me about this, I just thought in my mind, I don't have any time, because that's a lot of reading, like thousands of articles, columns, and on and on. And then, I just happened to have met Tania, like I think the year before when we started this. And to make a long story short, I just trusted Tania, and I asked her, I said, look, I got a lot of writing. Can you narrow it down, like from, several thousand to like maybe 500, and then narrow it down to like 100, and, that. Anyway, so I wish I could say I chose the material, but I did not. It was Tanya, and I think yourselves in combination. But I don't know. Maybe I would have done something different. I don't really know. All I know is that I love what was chosen. I can tell you this, that my regular publisher is the University of Arizona Press, and they actually wanted to do this. Now I've gone through editing with them, and I thought this one was different. This is different from my other work, and I just thought like, nah, I don't think that would work. For them to do the normal academic thing, the routine for this kind of because it's the equivalent of a memoir. And so I just said no. And of course, like Juan mentioned, I don't know if I was really running away from cops, but I kind of was. So I moved. They were always arresting me, so I moved to Phoenix, and then I moved to San Antonio, and that's how far back I know Juan. And anyway, so I thought to myself, and I'm part of a Calpoli. I'm part of Calpoli, Toshicalco, out of Tucson, and I know Juan from Danza from way back, with Andres Segura, who actually sent me on this other journey to find what we were looking for, Antigua Residencia de los Aztecas, and on and on. That's a whole nother project. But anyway, so when Juan asked, I said, absolutely, I thought that was the right place to go, on top of the fact that Juan Gomez Quiñones, who I think was your first book or one of your first books, he was one of my first professors and my mentor throughout, all this time. Yeah, you can see the book right there, exactly where your finger's at. Yeah, so I felt good. And for the other reason that it's like why I choose certain writers to name in my books. A lot of times, even Raza books, even indigenous books, you'll see like Murphy, Jones, and all these other people, that people choose. And I'm like, no, we have indigenous writers, we have Raza writers, we have, native, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, so for me, I thought that was a perfect choice to go with yourselves. And then with Tanya, she's a little shy sometimes, but she's Yaqui. Also, to me, that was very helpful. The idea of keeping it in with an indigenous perspective. And I think that's what, when you see this book, that's what you see. It's an and I know I had that, but I have to tell the story. When I was 5 years old, I remember asking my dad, I go, why do they call us wetbacks? In Spanish, of course, And my dad said, don't even worry about it. We didn't swim across the ocean to get here, And so I remember, in my mind, I've always had this indigenous consciousness because of my dad, because it was deeper than simply we're not that, or we are, or we're not, it was more like he explained something, kind of what people call positionality. The people that come from across the ocean are telling us to go back, and my dad taught me different, So when I put it in Tanya's hands, I knew it was going to be in good hands. So I don't know, maybe Tanya can now explain how she chose or what she chose.
Thank you. Thank you again. It was an honor to choose all this material. Again, I dove super in, reading absolutely everything. But I was already doing that to begin with when I had met you. I think I met you at the Mexicanos por la Causa event, and then I invited you to a yoga event. And it was about your inner warrior. And he's like, my book is about Yolki. And after that, like all your knowledge and wisdom, I incorporated in my healing, in my yoga education, in my classes, aromatherapy, and absolutely everything. So having el privilegio de poder hacer like this whole work with you guys, and the reading and everything, again, was a blessing. I personally enjoyed a little bit more because I felt like it was more like a bibliography for Cintli. All your writing, your family stories. I always say the Chicanx story, but he has like millions of other stories in there. It's a little bit personal too. Like you have a lot of stories about your family. I love the pictures of your family. Like to me, that was more interesting. And we had a little battle going on because I was like more all your stories. I wanted to pick all your stories, your life stories. And then Juan over here was more like all the education and the Chicanos and the history. And that was amazing because there's another story that I love about that too, which was, I think, the Tres Águilas. I don't know what chapter it's on, but that was really, I love that story. And then he likes to write about other people, testimonios and memorias. So a little bit of all that little battle and going against back and forth, I'm like, I think, Juan, you guys did an amazing job. The curriculum and the discussions, we personally practice them when we go on our events, which is really awesome. Every time a ceremonia, every time I walk in prayer now. I'm like, I breathe in prayer now. And that's awesome. That's literally thanks to you guys. So it was an honor and a blessing again.
And if I can add,
go ahead,
real quick, because I forgot to tell you why I chose Tania. Also, one thing I forgot, she mentioned it right now. She actually invited me to yoga. What do they call it? Yoga, guided yoga. Yeah, and it turned out to be guided meditation, and that was right before my Yorkie book came out. And after she did this at a health fair, and it was like about 100 people. All I know is that after the guided yoga, I was like as calm as you can be. And I said, hey, if you could do that for my book, Yorkie, because like it's a lot of violence. And at the end, I'm always like this, trembling, from the topic. And I said, if you do that, that'll be great. And she did it. And it was exactly what I thought. I did not get re-traumatized. And I haven't been re-traumatized since. Because anyway, so that was what was special for me. And that's why I asked her. And so that's that other connection. Anyway, so I interrupted you.
And I want to mention also that Tania, you then Dr. Cintli asked you to close the book with a prayer meditation, much like you do with some of the ceremonias and the book readings and the pláticas that Dr. Cintli has given. And like he said, because Dr. Cintli, in his writings, he writes a lot about police violence because he experienced and was almost killed in 1979 when he was working for Lowrider magazine, and he was assaulted by 4 deputy sheriffs, right, Cintli?
Yeah.
And so, as he mentioned, his book Yorkie, which came out in 2019, I believe, speaks extensively is on police violence in this country and the violence that he experienced. And we'll get into that a little bit later. I do want to mention, as just up front, that y'all also digitized and photocopied many of the magazines that weren't digitized and the articles and put them in Word for us. And from Dr. Cintli's extensive journalistic and academic writings, they selected about 160 pieces that they sent to Anissa and I at Aztlan Libre Press for possible publication consideration. From those about 160 pieces, we narrowed it down to 91 that we selected, which is still a lot. This is the biggest book we've published at 512 pages. So we published 91 of his best articles and representative articles, journalistic columns, articles, and scholarly works over the course of these last almost 50 years. And he touches upon, almost every theme and issue available that affects our indigenous raza community and other ethnic groups, communities, including, African Americans, but, police brutality, the Chicano movement, Chicano studies, immigration, racism, our indigenous and Chicano identity, the indigenous philosophy and spirituality, our representation in the media, our connection to maíz on this continent, and the colonization of the indigenous people and the African people on this continent, and the list goes on and on. So it's a pretty extensive book, touches on a lot of different things. So what I'd like to do now, because time's going by pretty quickly, is I'd like to ask Dr. Cintli to read or discuss one of the articles in the book. But before I turn it over to quickly, just in case there's some people out there that doesn't know who Dr. Cintli is, Dr. Cintli Rodriguez is an emeritus associate professor in the Mexican American Studies Department at the University of Arizona in Tucson, where he taught since 2008. He was born in Mexico, but raised in Los Angeles, and he received his bachelor's at UCLA in 1976 and his master's and PhD at the University of Wisconsin at Madison in 2005 and 2008, respectively. He's a longtime award-winning writer who, through the years, has written for many publications, including being a nationally syndicated columnist for 12 years from 1994 to 2006, first with Chronicle Features, then with Universal Press Syndicate, and his last two books with the University of Arizona Press is Our Sacred Maize is Our Mother, Indigeneity and Belonging in the Americas, which came out in 2014, and Yolki, A Warrior Summoned from the Spirit World, Testimonios on Violence, which came out in 2019. He's working on the third book of this trilogy, Smiling Brown People, The Color of the Earth, is forthcoming. And currently he writes a bi-monthly column for the Progressive Populist and directs the Raza Killings Database Project. I should mention that from these 91 pieces that we included in this book, they were originally published in 36 different publications. So we're very proud to have him here, and I'll turn it over to you for a piece on the book, Dr. Cintli.
Yeah. I was going to say something real brief, and I will. That when I came to this country, it was in 1960. So I was familiar with the era prior to the Chicano movement, but I was too young to be part of the Chicano movement. But I was very well aware of racism, the day I got here. So from 60 to 70, so to speak, right? That was my coming of age, And then when I remember the walkouts, that was 68, but 70 that's when really everything blew up, so to speak. And that was when they killed Rubén Salazar and a couple other people also. And so I got into the Chicano movement at that point. And what I wanted to say is that, so I'm very well familiar with the whole everything that happened in terms of the different ideas, like whether they were from Texas or from Colorado or California, et cetera, et cetera. And one thing that I noticed is that, they used to call it the Frozen Revolution in Mexico, and in my mind, it's almost like we had that here, in the US, like the Frozen Chicano Revolution. Because what happened is almost like nobody seems to know what happened after 72 or 73, maybe 75 perhaps. And to me, I look at it like that's what this book is about, because I never stopped writing and I was documenting pretty much human rights struggles from, and again, from before, during, and then this is really a lot of the after, which is heavy stuff, especially the that indigenous consciousness, that migration consciousness about that we belong here, as opposed to like, we got to go back to where we came from. So I usually don't read, but I'm just gonna read like maybe a page of the intro, because I'd rather describe stuff, but still. Anyway, so here's the introduction, and this is, I always tell Tanya, I'll read it and you'll see what I mean. Okay, so it says, I've been writing my whole life, and yet in all those years, I had never heard of, much less been referred to as a word healer. Yet that is how my colega and friend Tania Pacheco referred to me when she first delivered a closing prayer meditation when my Yolki book on violence was released in 2019. A word healer? If that describes me and my work, then it is an honor. Both my parents, Juanita Garcia and Roberto, it says Roberto, okay, it's my dad, Ricardo. Okay, Juanita and Ricardo were born in Tenochtitlan, Mexico City, but independently arrived in Aguascalientes sometime during their childhood. There they met and were married in 1948. I was born in 1954, and by the time we moved to Tijuana, when I was 4 years old, I had 3 older siblings and 2 younger brothers. In 1960, my father brought us to the United States, where we settled into a little alley shack on Whittier Boulevard in East Los Angeles, California. My youngest brother was born in East LA a few years later. Born in Mexico and having come to the US when I was 5 years old, I know that life was hell for Mexicanos in this country at that time, especially those with no knowledge of the English language and those that were chocolate brown like me. I imagine if I had any healing to do with my writing, it was from the decade in which Gringo society, especially abhorred raza, and when Mexican Americans also did not accept Mexicans as part of La Chicanada. In this hate climate, I was always referred to as a mojado or a wetback. When I went from junior high school to high school, that's actually when it got worse, because by then my English was proficient and I had lost my accent and was able to inconspicuously listen in on conversations in which people regularly and callously expressed their vicious sentiments against Mexican peoples. In effect, my psyche was shaped in those days before the Chicano movement, cognizant of how raza were treated as less than human by society, some worse than others, and raza conceived of themselves and identified before, during, and after the height of the movement. My actual writing began in 1972 at La Gente, a Chicano student newspaper at UCLA. The backdrop was Aztlan, the purported homeland of both the Aztecs and raza in the US. The land was also associated with the territory of the United States stole from Mexico after the 1846-48 Mexican-American War. The belief in Aztlan was the idea that we were not foreigners, but rather indigenous to these lands. In those days, the primary topics we all wrote about included the educational crises in barrio schools, the farm workers movement, the prison industrial complex, political prisoners, the Vietnam War, police abuse, immigration issues, barrio warfare, raza studies, and third world liberation movements. Many of us considered our struggle as part of that same liberation struggle worldwide, and especially linked to revolutionary and indigenous liberation struggles of the Americas. I'm going to stop there because I'd rather just explain the jump I made from that point, which is, as a lot of people know my work, aside from the police brutality stuff, is our connection to Maiz and Maiz culture. Because I think, I know I've been asked by different people at different times, and I'm thinking that perhaps that's probably been my greatest contribution. That is, from seeing ourselves as people that were created as a result of a war, 1848, or an invasion, 1519. When I stopped going to UCLA and became a writer, I met a lot of elders throughout the continent. And the elders that I knew never referred to the war or the invasion. They pretty much steered me to the idea that we come from Maiz. In other words, pushing back the idea of that we have thousands of years history, at least 7,000 years. And I think that for me, when I first started, or when I went back to the university, I think it was 2003, I think it was, people still thought in terms of 1848 or 1519. And I think now from what I see, and whether it's Knox, Chicano studies, et cetera, it seems like now everybody has that same consciousness that we weren't created by war or invasion. So anyway, so that's part of the intro, and I just wanted to do that. Like I said, I don't really read mostly, but anyway.
I wanted to follow up on that, if I may, Cintli. So with this book, I think this is the first time that you put your name on the cover as Dr. Cintli, though I know that with Yolki and with, our sacred Maíz, our mother, you use Roberto Cintli Rodriguez. For some people that may not know what Cintli means, can you explain to them and why you have chosen to go by Dr. Cintli now? And also, as part of your introduction, you say that you rather refer to yourself as a storyteller, and that there are 3 sort of concepts that you write about that are very important to your writing and your career is one that you're part of the red-brown raza journalism, and that you trace your writing back to Cintli, Intlapali, and you consider it part of creation resistance. So can you speak briefly about Dr. Cintli and what it means and why you chose to write, and then those three concepts that are very important parts of your writing?
You know, my memory is so bad. After I deal with Cintli, give me the prompts for the other concepts.
Okay.
So Dr. Cintli, well, I have a maestra, you know, Maestra Cab. A lot of people know her, Angelberta Cab, out of the Sierra de Puebla.
Yeah.
You know, but she grew up, or not grew up, but came to the U.S. and has been living in the Sacramento, California area for many, many years. And I got introduced to her by one of our other colleagues that's not here with us right now, Jenny Luna. She introduced me to her, I think, at least 20 years, if not, I think longer. I don't really count, but it's a long time ago. And she just really took to me and just liked me a lot. And we still stay in contact. When I got my PhD, she gave me the name of Dr. Cintli, you know, because Dr. Cintli means maíz. And we had talked about that before, because I had met a Dr. Cornelius out of Wisconsin. I think she was Anishinaabe. And then when I met her, I was all like excited, like a little kid. And I said, I'm going to be the future Dr. Cintli. And she's like, what's that? Like, it's like your name, Dr. Corn, except it'll be Dr. Cintli, you know? Anyway, I love her to death. She's awesome. You know, and that is her field too, corn also, you know? Anyway, so since I had talked to Mama Cab about it, then, you know, she made it formal, so to speak, you know? Oh. When I became 52, actually, she had given me another name, a ceremonial name. And, you know, that's not public, but I'm really proud of my relationship to Mama Cab, because she's been very influential in my work, in my life. And I think if you read the book, you'll know that I was pretty much guided by elders throughout, always in my work, especially one time I realized that, like, I was going throughout the continent looking for elders like Mama Cab, Andres Segura, Florencio Yescas, like all these different elders, not realizing that there were two elders in my own home, you know, my parents, you know. So and my mom gave me my first nickname in Nahuatl, which is, let's see if I can remember. It means serpent that drinks milk, Cincuate. My mom called me Cincuate as a little kid. And one day when my maestra, when she gave me the name, I looked it up in an old dictionary, and an ancient dictionary. And the two names are right next to each other. And I said, Cincoat. And I was like, how do I know that name? It sounds familiar. And then it says serpent that drinks milk. I go, oh, Cincuate, Cincoat. So that was my mom, yeah. Anyway, so my parents were very influential in everything, you know, all the stories, my dad, you know. But anyway, so that was the first thing. What was the second one?
So you contextualize your work as a red-brown
right.
raza journalism. Can you, and also trace it back to Cintli and Tlapali and consider it part of creation resistance. Can you speak briefly about that?
Yeah. Well, you know, there was a movement about, I don't know, about 10 years ago, I think, to celebrate 200 years of Latino journalism. I mean, I think some people were impressed by that, you know? And I was like, wait a minute. I go, our peoples have been writing forever, you know? We didn't start writing 200 years ago. And the proof, of course, were the códices, the amoshlis, you know, the Pope, you know, from the Maya, you know, the Quipu from Peru, you know? So our peoples have, you know, all peoples have memory, and all peoples have a way to store that memory. It was only Europeans that decided that there was only a certain kind of writing that constituted, like, I guess, good memory or good, you know, I guess legitimate, you know. So I never accepted that, you know, and so I wanted to acknowledge, because I obviously, I mean, like I mentioned, my dad taught me who I was, you know. But I didn't want to, because I do know people that they'll say they're indigenous, but kind of like they don't want to say they're Mexican anymore, or Chicana or Chicano. And I'm like, no, I can be both, you know. because that was my upbringing. But I also had that consciousness, you know. I know Tania has a cool story about that, because we talk about that. She says, "Oh, I skipped the Chicano phase. I just yaki." But in any case, I didn't skip it. You know, I grew up with it, and I didn't want to like leave that behind. That is part of me, you know. And I think all of us should have that consciousness. You know, anybody that's brown, anybody that has that Mexican raza, you know, that we need to be both, you know. No, we don't need to be both. But I'm saying, to me, I don't have a problem being both, because I don't want youngsters, you know, you know, I'll give you an example. Like with my East book, I used to do this. I would ask the students, like little kids, like 5 years old, 6, 7. I said, how many of you are native? How many of you are indigenous? You know, maybe 2 or 3 would raise their hands, maybe, you know. After I told them the stories of the maize and the story about the little ants, how Quetzalcoatl brought corn to the people, by the time the class is over with, and not only have they performed it as a play, like impromptu, but also when I ask again, how many of you are native? Everybody shoots their hand straight up. Now, it happened one time where a little kid, I think he was from the Dominican Republic, you know, and, you know, visually black, right? So he raised his hand, you know, kind of like shy. And he says, like, is that my story too? And actually the teacher had already told me about the student, you know. And I said, where are you from? And he says, Dominican Republic. I said, well, of course it's your story. Where do you think the word maíz comes from? And he was like, you know, with his eyes like wondering. And I said, it comes from where you come from. After that, I couldn't get rid of the guy. He was clinging on to me for taking pictures, and it was the coolest thing, you know. Anyway, so what was the next? Remember I told you my
So in Tlili, in Tlapali, and I think you've answered that, is writing.
Creation resistance.
In Nahuatl, just like Cintli is Nahuatl, it means the path of the red and black ink. Can you? A little bit about that.
Well, yeah, that's been my work, you know. And again, I was having this conversation with Tania the other day, preparing for this, about how my mentor, you know, and you're the Juan Gomez-Quillones, who you published, how I remember when I first came up, you know, through college, everybody and their grandmother was Marxist, Leninist, Maoist, you know, variation of. And I love that stuff, you know, I mean, because it taught us to know our economics, etc. At the same time, I always thought, like, how come they never quote anybody native, you know? There's no Raza scholars, there's no native scholars, and on and on and on. Or well, yeah, you had a few people of color, but I just thought, like, there seems to be something missing. It doesn't quite reach us, you know? And so that was my motivation, you know? Like, I wanted to know those scholars. That's why I said, when you read my Maíz book, that's where you see that. If you look at it, the reference page, the bibliography, it's almost all Raza, all native peoples, all Mexican scholars. And so when people say they can't find any, they aren't looking good enough, you know? And that's why I love being here in Mexico, because, I mean, I get to meet all these awesome scholars. One of my other mentors, just like Juan Gomez-Quillones, was Alfredo Lopez Austin. He just passed. That's another comic that's coming out, I think, and not this one coming up, but the one after. I'm writing about Alfredo Lopez Austin. In any case, so to me, that's been my path, you know, of knowing that, you know, we can be, you know, we can have an economic analysis, you know, but we also are part of a culture that's thousands of years old. Otherwise, we're relegated to this idea that we're somehow new peoples, you know, or that we don't have that history of thousands of years. And, you know, I know everybody here on the panel, plus Angela and Irene, and we're all on that same path, you know. Everybody here, and it's awesome, because, like I said, perhaps in the past it wasn't like that, but it is now. Now the last part, creation resistance. You know, I don't know if I'm supposed to or not, but I will. I think that really was created by Patricia Gonzalez, you know, who I was married to for a generation. Because in my mind, I think I created it, but I remember all the time we used to always have back and forth pláticas, you know. And I think she might have, because I think we talked about it not long ago, about a year ago maybe, and she may have. So one time she accused me of stealing her ideas, and I was like, I go, no, we're sharing ideas. Anyway, she's an incredible writer, and but so I think both of us, and especially when you see it in our writings, I mean, both of us, and I think more me later, you know, but we write about it because to me, creation resistance is, you know, I mean, on my end, I developed that through our struggle in Arizona. You know, in Arizona, we battled the state. You know, the state tried to tell us who we were. You know, and they try to take ethnic studies away and on and on. You know, raza studies, indigenous studies. You know, Black and African American studies, Native studies, everything. They tried to take that away, and our students, it was really a student-led fight. You know, it was awesome. You know, little kids. I'm talking about middle school. I got arrested with middle school students. You know, that's why I know that. You know, middle school, high school, and college, of course. And I remember, I mean, we must have had like 2 to 3 protests per week for like probably about 3-4 years straight, like every single week. And I remember one time just sitting back thinking like, you know, every time Jan Brewer farts, you know, or Arpaio, you know, burps, you know, it's like we react, you know. And I thought to myself, it's like we're not creating, we're reacting, you know. We call it resistance, but it's really, we're being driven by them, you know, Jan Brewer, Arpaio, you know, Tom Horn, you know, all those characters, they were driving us, who we were. And that's why I thought like, wait a minute, when do we get the chance to create, you know? And that's where that idea came forth, the idea of creation resistance, that we have to create even while we resist. And it can't be one or the other, it has to be both, you know? Because I always say like, if we just create only, then we just become hippies, you know? Like just, you know, be cool and, you know, not worry about a thing, you know, which is okay too, right? But our reality is that we're living in the most fascistic state in the country. And so we couldn't let it go. We couldn't just hang out and do nothing. So we had to continue fighting. But while we resisted, we were creating also. And the proof is what you just published. That's part of the creation. I know I had the conversation with Lupe, you know, because all of us nationwide are all connected. That's why like Angela and Irene, you know, we're all connected. You know, we're all battling at these different states, or Lilliana also. And I thought to myself, you know, while they're attacking us, I mean, we need to continue creating, you know, because no matter what they do, we still need to create. We still got to create curriculum, you know. And I think, I don't know if I ever discussed that with you, Juan, but that's what this is. This is the result of, you know, we still continue creating while we're fighting. And anyway, so I think that's pretty much it.
That's cool. I should mention that this book, Writing 50 Years, Más o Menos Amongst the Gringos, also, besides having an introduction by Dr. Cintli, he also writes introductions to every decade, a very personal introduction, and introductions to various of his writings, because we include excerpts also from his 7 previous books. This is his 8th book. If you're interested, you can purchase it on our website at aztlanlibrepress.com. And throughout the month of November, we have a special discount rate. So just go to our website. I want to bring in the other educators that are with us today, because as I mentioned earlier, this book, besides documenting Dr. Cintli's writings over the course of almost 50 years, and not only does he have journalistic writings and academic writings in here, but also poetry and short stories and creative writing, you know, Huehuetlatoli, ancient guidances that he's written in more contemporary times. So it's a very diverse literary and journalistic book, and history also. It covers, it's multidisciplinary, right? So we wanted to make this book textbook reader, as I mentioned earlier, for Chicano, Indigenous, ethnic studies, and journalism communications courses for college, university, and high school students. So we asked 3 educators, as I mentioned, Guadalupe Carrasco-Cardona, Lilliana Saldaña, and Dr. Jenny Luna. So I want to bring them in, but just briefly, I want to thank them all. And Dr. Jenny Luna, who's not with us today, She has a PhD in Native American Studies and is currently an associate professor in Chicano Studies at California State University, Channel Islands. Now, she has been a danzante mexica for 30 years and a community birth doula for 15 years, a lifelong Chicana activist. Dr. Lilliana Patricia Saldaña is originally from Yanaguana, San Antonio, Texas, and is an associate professor in Mexican American Studies at the University of Texas in San Antonio. And over the past years, she has been intricately involved and collaborated on statewide organizing efforts to expand Mexican American studies in Texas public schools. And she is deeply committed to sustaining indigenous plant-based foods through community talleres and pláticas. And Guadalupe Carrasco-Cardona is the chair of the Association of Raza Educators in Los Angeles and a founding member of the Liberated Ethnic Studies Model Curriculum Coalition. And she has a master's degree in curriculum and instruction, language and literacy from Arizona State University, and has been a high school teacher for 21 years. And she's also proud mother, wife, and Chicana matriarch of her family. So thanks for being here. And I'd like to switch to you, if I can start with you, Lilliana. And so we asked y'all to write questions, writing prompts and activities at the end of each of the 5 decades based on Dr. Cintli's writings. So how was that experience for you? And tell us what you did and what you think of the book once it's a finished product, and well, how you think that, this book ranks as a, Chicano ethnic studies, indigenous studies textbook and reader.
So good afternoon. It's so good to see everyone. Primeramente, I just want to say, thank you to Roberto for these enseñanzas. I met Roberto and Patricia about 20 years ago here in San Antonio. And then when I was a graduate student at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, I ended up meeting up with Roberto and Patricia again because they were also doctoral students. So I feel like I've been following Roberto's work for at least 20 years, and his work has had such a tremendous impact in my consciousness. It shaped my consciousness. It shaped my pedagogy. It shaped my work as an activist. When Roberto wrote about that concept of creation resistance, it really made me think about my own work as an activist scholar. Were we reacting? Was there room? Were we creating room for creation in the process? But there's so much in this book. Roberto's work, he covers 50 years of his writing. It is a book that, even though I was familiar with his work and the work that he had been writing over the past 20 years, as a syndicated columnist, as a scholar, I was not aware of a lot of the writings from the 1970s and 1980s. And I became very present to how he had been writing about some of these issues over the past 50 years, right? Issues on identity, indigenous identity, indigeneity, police brutality, and of course, maíz, colorism. And so, he opens his book with an essay on the purpose and history of Chicano studies from 1973. And I thought, wow, this is definitely not only an essay that anyone in a Mexican American studies course should read, but it's something that anyone who's in the field needs to read, right? The history of the discipline, the history of the field and its relationship in academia. And, as we're thinking about sustaining Mexican American studies in higher education, what are the things that we need to be doing to ensure that MAS continues to respond to the needs of community, the desires, the dreams of community. But I definitely see myself using Roberto's book in my MAS classes, especially in the Introduction to Mexican American Studies, Introduction to Chicanx Studies. There's so much in the book, I kept flagging, essays that I thought, oh my goodness, my students need to read this, right? In my Chicano studies class, oh, they need to read this in my foodways class. Roberto's work really influenced me into developing a new class at UTSA called Mexican American and Indigenous Foodways because of his work on maíz. And I thought any book has to start with that, with this epistemology, with this foundational knowledge. So, I mean, there's really a lot in the book. I mean, from his work, and as Juan, as you were saying, even those who teach literature, and it doesn't need to be Mexican American studies. I think anyone who's in the field needs to provide access to this book, right? But I'm thinking educators who teach literature, because he's writing, in various genres, editorials on, anti-immigration policies, police brutality, anti-Mexican racism. He's also, you've also included, Roberto, open letters, poetry, academic essays, Huehuetlatoli, documentary reviews, creative writing pieces. I mean, I'm thinking this is really a book that so many can use, not only at the high school level, but at the university. I'm thinking, journalism, communication studies, obviously Chicano studies, ethnic studies, journalism, creative writing, literature. So I was very honored to have had the distinct pleasure of reading Roberto's work when Tania and Roberto put the book together, and learning so much about your work, Roberto. I feel like I got to know you more through the work that you produced in the 1970s, 1980s, and the 90s, because I got to know your writing about 20 years ago, and I got to see you build on the work that many of us know today. But, you were writing about, Chicano studies, you were writing about Aztlan. And I kept thinking, wow, my students need to read this essay from someone who was writing about this, 50 years ago, from someone who experienced the Chicano movement, from someone who was a part of this social movement that was having conversations about, what it means to be Chicano, why it's important to embrace our indigeneity, what it means to live in Aztlan. So, I mean, there's just a lot in the book that I think would be useful, for our young scholars.
Let me go ahead and bring in Lupe Carrasco-Cardona and your thoughts on this. And I have a couple of quick questions for both of y'all as part of the ones that designed and developed these questions or writing prompts and activities at the end of each decade. But your thoughts, Lupe, about the book and about Dr. Cintli's work and its use as, Chicano ethnic studies, even history, journalism, communications textbook reader.
I will start by saying that I was really honored also when I was asked to do this, because, obviously Dr. Roberto Cintli Rodriguez is, he's just such an amazing, not just a scholar, but also, somebody who actually works in the community, who makes an impact at a grassroots level as well. So it was a real honor to be asked to do this. And then when I received it, it was like, it's a lot of, it's a lot to read, but it was really easy to read. It was really, something about his style of writing is that he's writing about really complex and very difficult and profound issues, but he has a way of explaining them, kind of how he speaks. So you're learning a lot, but it's really kind of easy to learn and go in depth with it. I think the issue that I had with, in a timely manner, coming up with prompts and things like that, was a couple of things, but one of them was that I wanted to make sure to capture everything. And there's just so much, right? As Dr. Lilliana Saldaña just explained right now, there's just so much from different genre, and also from different, like you're kind of floating around geographically to different areas and different time periods. And then, and then he's like writing in those different decades. And so, so I felt, really the necessity to ensure that whatever we were creating in terms of curriculum was not going to miss any of those important nuggets of all those different time periods. And so that was a challenge, but it was definitely like, it was so wonderful to see it in the published format, because like I literally was in a relationship with the text for a certain period of time, just going in there and really playing with it and all of that. And it was also very meaningful to me because I've been an educator now I'm in my 22nd school year as a high school teacher. And the very first book that was given to me by my father, who is now, has passed on, was The X and La Raza 2. And so he was like, Mija, you need to use this book, right? And so I would photocopy it. My book now is like, broken at the spine from using it. And so it was really cool to see writings from that time period in this as well. And I was thinking the very same thing, like I would definitely be able to use this for different courses, like a creative writing class. You could use it for like an autobiographical narrative writing class, for journalistic writing, different types of journalistic writing classes, and of course Chicano, Indigenous studies, ethnic studies. And it's extra important and extra valuable because, as you know, in the state of California, which is one of the first states to have an actual official ethnic studies model curriculum that we know is going to be the model for the other states. Even though our students, the Raza students are about 53% of the student population, and in some districts like LA, even more, right? We're like almost like 70-50%. Of the about, I believe it's like 900 pages of the model curriculum, only 77 pages are dedicated to the Chicanx Latinx chapter. And that's a real shame, right? So like literally, one of the decades here is has more information, more curriculum, more meat to feed the youth than even the quote unquote model curriculum for the state of California. And so that's a really important thing to really think about. Like there's still so much more that we need to provide for our students, but I'm really happy that like Tania and of course Aztlan Libre Press and of course Dr. Roberto Cintli Rodriguez pulled all of these writings and brought them together for us, because they were published at one time, but this is a way to bring them back and make them useful, and they're very useful, and our students at many levels really need this so that we can start to reconnect. And as was said earlier, like what was being written in the 70s, in some cases even more relevant today, because we kind of went towards like taking steps forward in the discipline of Chicanx studies, but in some ways we're kind of like taking some backwards as well. And this is a reminder that the discipline isn't just a discipline, it's a way of life. It's about the community, bringing the community. And it's kind of, this is a reminder of how we need to make sure that we bring our comunidades, our familias, our ancestors, and the next generations into what we do in Chicano studies, Mexican American studies, Indigenous studies, etc. So thank you so much for the opportunity to take part in that, and it was a wonderful experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Lupe and Liliana. And I want to ask you, because you, Lupe, you've taught in high school for over 20 years, and I know Liliana has taught a couple of dual credit courses in Mexican American Studies in high school also. But I think it's a great reader for college, university students, and I think personally, even for high school students. How do you think this would go over for high school students? And some people have commented that because it has, the title is Writing 50 Years, Más o Menos, Amongst the Gringos, that because we use gringos, and some people think that gringos is a bad word for white people. I personally don't, but that they might not use it as a text just because it has gringos on the title. What do you think about that, and just for high school students?
I mean, I think because when I read the word gringos too, it doesn't have that connotation of being negative. It's just, to me, using the word gringo is like when I hear somebody say that, it's a familiar word, right? So it's a word, it's like, my name is Guadalupe, right? Most people call me Lupe, but every so often I have someone who calls me Lupita, right? And it's like, when they call me that, it's like, okay, I feel you, you feel me, we feel each other. And that's how I hear gringo. When somebody says gringo, it's like, okay, you're somebody who speaks what I speak about, what white folks are. It's not like a negative thing. I think it's not a bad word at all. But in terms of using this for high school students, absolutely, because too much what we're hearing right now is that youth are not getting an opportunity to learn about themselves and their history, the community, and so that results in lots of things, right? Like disconnection in school. And so what we're seeing is that they're not continuing on to teach or to take university classes or go to college. And so I would definitely want to use this college. I also teach a couple of Chicano Latino studies classes at Cal State Long Beach and Cal State Northridge. I would definitely use it there, but I think that I would not wait to use it there. I would definitely use it. I would even pull some of this and give it to middle school students. Because they need to be talking and thinking about these things way before high school and college, because that's how we're going to ensure that they get there.
A good point. And Dr. Cintli's language is very accessible, right? It's not one of this highfalutin academic language. I mean, it's column, a lot of it is journalistic work. And it's, even though he's talking about complex subjects, he writes in a very simple, straightforward, informative language. Lilliana, if you can comment on that too, about its use as a high school studies reader and maybe even middle school, and if the term gringos offends you or not, or you think it would offend the high school administration, who now making the decisions, obviously, in the state as to what textbooks students should be reading.
Yeah, I mean, the word gringo does not offend me. I don't know how administrators would feel about the word gringo in a city like San Antonio. I think I'm positive there was a journalist, a Chicana journalist, who used that term a few years ago in the Express News, and may have gotten some I don't know, retaliation about it, but I think that this book is very much useful at the high school level. I'll be honest with you, I am not as experienced as Maestra Lupe. I've been teaching dual credit for a couple years now, and what I have learned is that I would want to incorporate readings like the short essays and editorials that are in this book. And I did a lot of, amending the syllabus this semester, including readings that I could find that were shorter, because there isn't a high school textbook in Texas on Mexican American studies, right? So, I think that some of the more jargonistic academic articles, I think we'll lose our youth with some of that, with some of those articles. And I think that Roberto's work is so accessible. It's profound. I mean, his work, he's looking at profound ideas. He's looking at socially relevant issues that I think our youth are already interested in. Like, they're talking about police brutality. They're talking about racism. They're talking about identity. And so I would definitely use the essays in his book. I would use the entire book, actually. And I think that it would be relevant to middle school students as well.
Oh,
Can I share just one quick thing also?
sure.
He has one of the short stories, I don't remember the title of it, but he does a really good job with something that we as Mexican Americans, Chicanos, right, raza, deal with, which is like how we feel not fully from here, not fully from there. And then there's the indigeneity and the de-indigenization that has happened to our people over years. And he writes in the short stories these very simple little dialogue and thoughts that the characters are going through that really capture it, even for somebody like us, right, that we've been really thinking about this and reflecting on this for most of our lives, that I think is just so powerful, and I would love to share with my students as well. I think that those are the types of short stories that our students need to be looking at, and then doing close reads and pulling out little parts and having students like analyze, like, have you ever felt this way, and things. I think it could just do so much rich discussion and facilitate rich discussion in our classrooms, for sure.
Great. Thank you so much for those comments. I want to take it back to Dr. Cintli now. See if you'll share with us something else from the book, Dr. Cintli, maybe read a little excerpt or a piece or discuss something that after all of these excellent comments here and insights into your book.
Well, I thought about two things real quick, and then maybe I can read something else. But briefly, the word gringos, you know. So if you look at the title, Writing 50 Years Más o Menos Amongst the Gringos. So imagine if the book was called Writing 50 Years in the United States. In other words, it doesn't, positionality doesn't work for me. In other words, I came from Mexico, you know, and I am in Mexico again, meaning that there's a reason it's there, you know. And I don't know how many of you watched the boxing match yesterday from with Güero Canelo. What's his name? That's a restaurant, Güero Canelo. Canelo Alvarez, right?
Alvarez.
Yesterday. At the very end, he says, Viva Mexico, cabrones, you know? So imagine if he had blurted out, Viva Mexico, you know? It's two different things, you know? So in other words, if I had put the United States, it's gonna, in other words, there's a reason it's there. Just like Tania mentioned this earlier, though, just the word yolki, the concept of yolki, you know, it's like, it's there for a reason, you know? If somebody disagrees with the word, maybe they should be stepping back and say, why did he use that, you know? You know, because in other words, I was treated. I think if I look back, even the very first day crossing the border, you know, it's like there was like something different about me and my family that it was not accepted. And I say to the last day I was in the US, meaning I could have just put in the United States. In other words, if I complied, if I went along, if I assimilated, you know, hey, everything's good. But I'm like, no, I have memory and I'm not going to shy away from it. If it's rejected, it's telling us about our society. It's not telling us anything about me, you know? So I think that's the whole idea. Now, the other topic about my writing style, when I went up for my dissertation, I was asked by my committee, they said, how come you write so simple? And I said, well, look, all my knowledge came from elders, including my parents. If I wrote it and they could not understand me, what was the point? You know? And so remember what I mentioned also, that when my East book, when it first came out, I went to a Mexicayo Academy. That was like the big premiere. It's a school from 3 years old to 8 years old. And I read them and I taught them the story about the ants. And I mentioned that already. But they understood it, you know, and I told them, you know, and I've done this several times, and I tell them, I said, look, this is university material and you can understand it, you know. So in other words, it's something, and that's what would happen with our struggle with about ethnic studies, you know, in Arizona. Like when they try to tell us that our history began with Columbus, even our 3-year-olds knew better, you know. That's why it was like a 12-year struggle, because no nos dejamos, you know, and the little kids would not permit that, you know. So those are the two things that I wanted to mention. There's a column that I wrote that's coming out next week. That's the one I would really want to talk about. It's an awesome story. It's called Nuclear Dreams, but you'll have to catch it later. I don't know why, but I just opened it up, and I opened it up to the Yolki section. So it's kind of weird because I really don't like to deal with violence anymore, but can't escape it. So I'm just going to read maybe a couple of paragraphs from the preface and explain perhaps a little bit about why I don't really like to do that. But anyway, so the one thing to remember about my Yolki book is that wasn't my plan. I didn't plan to write that. My publisher, after Michael Brown was killed, I wrote 2 articles about how the media and government were pretty much whitewashing the topic, because everything you would hear was in black and white, you know. And myself having that 50-year experience at least, you know, since 70 or even 68, you know, of the whole Raza history of all the brutality. I wrote 2 articles talking about how our communities have been deeply affected, the red and brown communities, as well as the black community. So red, black, and brown, or indigenous black and brown. And so anyway, so to make a long story short, she convinced me to write the book, and it happened. And I did get re-traumatized in the process of writing it, because it's not pleasant. I literally watched over like 1,000 videos of people getting killed, or brutalized, and it wasn't pleasant. And I didn't really want to live that anymore, because I think I got over my trauma and fear. One of the stories in here about my friends from Guatemala that were tortured, and to me, it's kind of like re-traumatization. It's not like once and then it's over. It can happen over and over and over. And I used to see that with friends of mine, like this friend of mine, I think there's a story in here about her, Maria Guardado, who always would tell her story, how she got tortured, and it was vicious. And she would break down every single time. And in my mind, I would see that and I go, I don't want to do that anymore, because I used to do that. And it's not pleasant to re-traumatize yourself, But anyway, so I'll read it, like I said, about 2 paragraphs, and then I'll explain a little bit more regarding that, and then I'll stop there. But so this is part of the preface for Yolki. And it's, okay, so sometime close to midnight on March 23rd, 1979, on Whittier Boulevard and McDonald in East Los Angeles, California. And those of you from LA or ever been to LA, if you know where that big arch is on Whittier Boulevard, that's where it happened, like about 20 feet away, right on the corner of McDonald, Whittier McDonald. Anyway, so on the corner of Whittier and McDonald, I died, okay? On March 24th, 1979, that is the next day, on March 24th, a little past midnight, I willed myself back to life on that cold and bloody intersection. I did not actually die, but I was killed that night, attacked, then beaten over and over again with riot sticks, wielded by at least 4 members of the Special Enforcement Bureau, an elite tactical unit of the LA County Sheriff's Department, who struck my body and head repeatedly with their sticks until my skull fractured and my blood pooled in the street. To the average person, that statement may not make any sense. For many years, it didn't make sense to me either, until one night the explanation came to me in a dream. But it would be many more years before I was able to comprehend its message. Hopefully, what I write here will explain both the above statements and how I came to the title Yolki for my memoir, Testimonio. In the middle of a cornfield in Huitzilac, Morelos, Mexico, I'm given aguamiel, the juice of the maguey plant, to drink. At night, presumably, it prompts a dream. I am hovering above a sprawled body. Suddenly, I realize that that body is mine. My spirit and my consciousness are outside of my body. But how can this be possible? How can I be here looking down at my own body? I observe my bloody body sprawled on the ground below me. I know it is me because those are my pants, my jacket, my hair. I am not struggling. I am not moving. I am lifeless. A cold realization sets in, but it doesn't make sense. I'll stop there because it'll explain the whole process of Yolki. And this is kind of funny, but like me and Tania have gone different places to talk about whether the other book or the Yolki book, the 50 years book or the Yolki book. And I always say she explains Yolki, the idea of Yolki better than I do. And I don't know if you might want to explain that right now, because again, I don't like even doing that, it kind of bothers me. So I would like to, if maybe you could do that, Tanya, if you can explain what Yolki is.
I want to say a couple of things about the Gringos word. Because I feel like, why is it offensive, or how can it be offensive or would it be the same offensive as if there were whites in there? Gringos, whites, you know what I mean? I feel like it's really cool that you did it on purpose so that they can see that they want to be called human or people, just how we do. We don't want to be called Mexicans, brown, black, you know what I mean? Yaquis, natives, like, no, we're just human. So I felt like that was really cool. That you did on purpose. Another thing I wanted to add was that you do have a very easy and beautiful way to express, inspire, and to co-edit and translate work. It's really beautiful. And to make it your own magic, again, I'm a yoga teacher and I use this for my yoga sequences. I include all the creation stories. So I think that's really awesome. And another thing on the Yolki, again, it's your inner warrior. It's what we literally have been here our whole lives. When you go within yourself, you realize that you can call your inner warrior. And then you just gave me the word, the Nahuatl word. And not just for Yolki, but for a bunch of other stuff, for our Yolot, which is corazón in Nahuatl. So that's very inspiring again, and I wanted to say thank you for that.
I don't know how much time there's left, but I do want to say that, like, me and Tanya, we're actually going to finish that Smiling Brown as co-editors. We're going to finish that book because I think a lot of you know I've been working on it for years, but just like this book, you know, I didn't have time type of thing. So now it's like, because Tanya has translated the Yolki book and the Mais book, we're gonna co-edit the Smiling Brown book, and so we should have another.
You're excited for that project, yes.
Yeah. Well, she's written for that too, and even her cousin. And anyway, it's just an awesome book. It's kind of like police brutality, but at a spiritual level. You know, we get literally attacked for, you know, that there's supposed to be a right color. To me, I've always said there's no such thing as a good color or a bad color. You know, we're all human beings, you know, and we should be proud of whatever we are, you know. And because I don't, well, anyway, I don't want to go much longer on that, but just saying that's something for the near future, and I'm excited about it. And I go, technically unfortunately, because that's not for Aztlan Libre Press, but that's for the trilogy for the University of Arizona Press. But I think we're more than happy to perhaps collaborate some more in the future, you know, with Aztlan Libre Press. It's been awesome. And anyway, just looking forward to do some more. Well, this work is barely beginning, because now, you know, it's going to be a lot of the travel, the tours, all that stuff. So I'm very excited about that.
I want to mention that we're going to go over about 10 more minutes or so, 10 to 15 minutes, because the conversation is so good. And there's a couple of things. There was a question from our Facebook page from Ed Tellis that said, Dr. Cintli, any plans on writing related to Mexico's Afro-Mexican heritage or contributions? What about that?
Man, I know Ed, but you know what? Ed doesn't know me. This is funny. No, this is funny because, no, I used to write for Black Issues in Higher Education, you know, in the early 90s. And I think actually I wrote for a whole 10 years. And that's actually what I did. I wrote about Blacks in Mexico, you know, the Afro-Latino connection, and on and on and on. Most people don't know it. He knows it. You know, he knows about Guerrero. He knows about Morelos, you know. I have no clue as to why our culture denies that, you know. My family, part of my family is from Morelos, from Cuautla and a couple other nearby towns, and that's Zapata country. You know, people describe him as Afro-Indigenous, you know. Some people use the word Afro-Mestizo, but a lot of it would say Afro-Indigenous. He was an indigenous man, but there's no denying that he had at least one grandmother that was Afro, you know, Afro-Indigenous, or, you know, whatever term we use. But that's why I said, like, we should be proud of whatever we are. It doesn't matter what we are, you know, and that's part of who we are. One of the things that I wrote about, you know, at Black Issues is I would do the work of, what's his name? Gonzalo Aguirre Beltran. I interviewed him right before he died. His work showed that there were more African peoples in Mexico than Europeans, you know, during the colonial era. And that is absolutely not taught in schools, even probably now. I mean, now it's like at the specialty level, you know, like a scholar, like, you know, someone like Ed, as an example, you know. But no, absolutely. I've always done that and will continue to do that, you know. I can tell you this. See, a lot of my work is motivated because of that. You know, I've heard raza that are very anti-Black, or, you know, anti-white, or anti-something, Asian or whatever. And to me, it's like, no, that doesn't resonate with me. You know, we're all one people. You know, I was taught that by our elders, you know, that we're all one people and we should respect each other. regardless of who we are or what we are. Or, you know, like I don't go for that DNA percentage stuff, you know. It's kind of like, you know, we should learn to appreciate each other, you know, in our full complexity, you know.
Mhm.
That in a way, that's partly what the whole Smiling Brown's about, you know. See, part of it to me is expanding the idea, because when you live in a black and white world, you know, we get disappeared. And so I think little kids have to know that no matter what color they are, that's good enough, you know? And so part of it is including that color brown or the color red or the color black, etc. You know? And whether it's, again, white, any color is good, you know? And something happened in our society at a certain point where we started to value one color and to value the other. And that the whole point of Smiling Brown is to not do that, but to make sure that we are in the conversation too. So thanks, Ed, for that. You know, I really appreciate his work.
I want to mention that you do write about that in this book also, about Afro mestizaje, and also the intersection with the Black community, the Indigenous community, the Brown community, and the white community. And if anything, I think this book is a tool for anti-racism, right? Some people think that because the term Gringos is on the cover, that it's just going to be getting down on white people. Not any place in the book is that the case. You may get down against systems of oppression, right? About colonization and about racism, exploitation, right? And on different levels, but not against people of any color. So I think that's very important to point out. I want to open it up a little bit. If you, Lilliana or Lupe or Tania, have any questions for Dr. Cintli, would like to mention something else here before we leave.
No, I just wanted to reiterate that, you know, his work, you know, this collection of his writings is so important to, you know, Chicano studies, but, you know, Chicanx studies, but to our communities, because he does center the voices of, you know, red, brown histories, the perspectives of raza that are often invisible in mainstream media and colonial schooling. You get an idea of what the issues are, you know, over the past 50 years, you know, what he's dedicated his professional life to as a journalist, as a truth teller, as a storyteller, the issues that have been impacting Raza communities, you know, over the past 50 years. And so I highly recommend this book, and I look forward to Roberto's next book.
Oh, Lupe, do you have any final thoughts or words or questions you might have of Dr. Cintli?
I don't have any questions, but I just want to reiterate the same thing as well. Thank you for all of your dedication to writing about the, you know, the truth, for being a speaker of truth and doing it in such a way that really gives us a voice, where in most realms we are, you know, purposely kept voiceless. And so I just want to say thank you. I appreciate that. And I also look forward to your next book as well.
Thank you, Lupe. And before I get to Tania, I got another question here from Maria Gomez Murphy asking, how did Dr. Cintli not get swallowed by darkness, anger, and hate?
Oh, God. Well, I don't know if I could claim innocence there. I probably was the angriest person you would ever meet. You know, I hated even my own friends. You know, I think even my silence right now told you something, you know, like it wasn't pleasant, and nobody teaches you how to be or how to act or how to react, you know. I just thought everybody was a vendido. That is, I was fighting and nobody was there for me, you know. The only people that were there backing me up in those days, you know, was like, oh, what people call hoodlums, you know, all the plebe, all the barrio youth. That was my backup, you know. And all the movement people, all the politicos, all the academics, you know, it was like, there was a nice theory in the book, you know. But our peoples were being subjected to pretty heavy violence, you know. And Yeah, it took a long time to get rid of the hate, the hate, the anger. I credit two people for, well, technically three. I got rid of the fear, which is probably the most overwhelming part of that, through my friends from Guatemala. They had been tortured, and that was actually my last column. I wrote about that, and it's in the book too. I remember my friend Noemia, when I asked her, I go, what did they do to you? Because I'm skipping everything, right? But I asked her, I said, what did they do to you? And she says, everything that could be done to a woman for 15 days was done to me. You could imagine. So for me, I stopped asking, and I lost the fear of police at that moment right there. And not probably like a generation went by, and they asked me to translate their testimonials because they were suing the same dictator, Rios Montt, that was on trial. And I thought I imagined what had happened to him, but after I translated the testimonials, I was like, that radically altered who I was, I think as a writer, I think Patricia probably was very influential, because she's an incredible writer, it takes me 10 drafts to do what she does in her first draft, because I think I write pretty good now, but I don't think it was always that way. But again, it would take me 10 drafts for me to get to her level, and so I think it was, and her stuff was not negative, it was, I think that's where that creation stuff comes in. So very influential, nowadays, I'm part of the writing, editing, translating team with Tania. And I think I'm really happy right now, because if that can answer Maria's question, I think being influenced by people like that, that don't have that heavy negative stuff that I lived with for all those years, I think it's very influential, and it's just good. And that's why, everybody like here on the panel, and we mentioned Irene and Angela and all the people that have struggled for ethnic studies, and we've been on the cutting edge. Now it's critical race theory, right? But it's the same thing. Now, like I said, I'm really looking forward to it, and I'm honored that a colega, that Tania has accepted to co-write this with me. And I think you actually had the last word, didn't you?
Yeah, but I wanted to mention that
Right.
before I get to Tania, and we close it out here with a couple of things.
Right.
That in the introduction that Anissa and I wrote for this book, we mentioned that, we began, once we got the initial selections from you and Tania back in March 2020, and it took us about a year and a half. This was like the beginning of the pandemic, right? And the end of the Trump era, let's say. And let's hope. But we saw this book as a metaphor for the end, right when we were getting ready to put it out, we had gotten the vaccine, right? So we saw it as kind of the end of a very dark period with all the race riots and the deaths of so many people and sicknesses due to the pandemic, and the end of the Trump era and the beginning of Biden-Harris as a sort of metaphor for the end of this and the beginning of healing, even though we know that we have a long way to go still to heal ourselves on so many different levels. But the subject of healing and the issue of healing comes up a lot in this book. It's throughout this book. So it's a very important part of this book. And I know that even you talked about Tania's role, but the process, you invited her to end this book with a healing prayer and meditation, which you wrote. And I came to find out that it was the first time that you had published, Tania, right? In a book.
Yeah, I'm very blessed and honored. It's been my life, literally, like my life struggle, what I hurt, what I live. That's what I love of his work, because to me, all I see is a spiritual healing journey. of his life. And his silence, that last question, says everything, because silence speaks more than words. Literally, it's in the silence that we find ourselves. It's in the silence that doesn't matter what cosmic land you're from, Aztlan, the north, the south, the east. It's what's in your heart. And you do that, and the healing in this book has made a great impact in everyone and in everyone's life, and I love them. I love another book in here on how to become human. There's a lot of stories in there about that. And I think that's the whole point of this, is to become human again and to find your own human within you. And that's only through the silence, through the meditation, through the healing, and through the heart. So I thank you again, because it gives me the opportunity to touch more hearts. Because before I was doing like one-on-one healing for 15 years. One-on-one healing, hands-on healing. And now I'm very honored because he's giving me a platform to touch a lot more hearts with my herbalism, and mixing his obviously wisdom, knowledge, and sharing his healing journey through the book and his writing too. That's been really amazing. So I thank you for that.
And you mentioned,
you know what?
Go ahead, Dr. Cintli.
Yeah, two things, because I didn't really finish the answer, because there is something very specific that happened that answers your question. You know, I mentioned that I'm part of Calpoli Teoxicali. Well, I started running with when we started battling ethnic studies. We did a run from Tucson to Phoenix in 115-degree heat. And that radically changed everything, the struggle in Tucson about that. And afterwards, the Calpoli, they used to do weekly runs, you know, or they did 13 runs. And I started running with them. And then later they started running with me, so to speak. That is, my classes would do runs for AIDS, for domestic violence, for, you know, ethnic studies, and on and on. And I remember after all those years, I finally went to therapy right about that time. And then I told my therapist, I said, I'm healed already. I'm going to stop coming to see you. And she says, I know you're healed, but I need you to tell me why you're healed. And I said, because when I don't feel good, I run. And when I feel good, I run more. And she says, oh, that's awesome. So yeah, so that's how that happened. You know, there was one other thing I was going to say, but I forgot it. It doesn't matter. The point being, yeah, go ahead.
I should mention that, in fact, you write about the running as healing in this book also. That's one of the main things. In fact, one of your academic studies, but again, very, very community-based oriented. And I should mention that even in your article, Tania, your closing prayer meditation, you mentioned, as Cintli does throughout the book, the importance of us to come to terms with our, especially as a raza, but all of us as human beings, you know, with our roots. And us as raza, is very important to come to terms with our indigenous roots and our ties to the land here in the Americas and our connectedness throughout the Americas. And that's why your maiz is so important, and connectedness then to the whole cosmos as part of our healing, but important to get back to our roots.
There was that one other thing, and it's going to be obvious. Today's November 7th, you know?
That's right.
Her trial was November 7th.
This is the day that I won my criminal trial. It was the most radical thing that ever happened to me. You know, I was facing probably more than 20 years for trying to kill 4 cops. And I'm skipping the whole story, but when my attorney went into the judge's chamber after 9 months of going to court like 30 times, he came out of the judge's chamber from ear to ear. And I looked at the clock and it was 11:11, and it was November 7th. And so November 7th has been special for me forever. But I can tell you this, because this answers Maria's question. That is, every year I used to dread March 23rd, 24th, and 25th, because that's, you know, when I was in the jail. And one day, and it happened with the running part, you know, where I just said to myself, why do I note that stupid day, you know, or those stupid days, you know? I said, I have a victory day, you know, November 7th, you know? I said, so I consciously said, I'm going to celebrate November 7th hereafter, instead of like dread that other day. And so for me, as you could imagine, you know, for us to do this on this day, is an affirmation of that creation resistance. You know, this is part of the creation part, you know, the negative stuff, you know, like, you know, I don't want any of that stuff, you know, I just want to create. And I know I've told everybody here, you know, like I'm only saying that I'm retiring, but as you know, I'm actually probably writing more than I've ever written. And most of my writing hereafter, aside from, you know, me and Tanya are going to do joint writing, but, you know, and it'll be different. Maybe she could explain if she wants, but my writing here is like, I want to write about like the first time I came here, I wrote a story called Xochipilli, and that's actually going to get published next year. And, but the point is, I'm going to write just like the story about the ants and the maize. You know, I'm going to write about stories that are based on our thousands of years culture. And it's going to be aimed at children, even though it's for everybody. But like, I think kids more than anybody needs that, you know, they need to know that we have, you know, we didn't just show up on a boat, you know. Anyway,
we've been here on this continent for thousands of years, as you say. I do want to mention that if you're interested in purchasing a discounted copy, which we're going to be offering throughout the month of November, you can go to our website at aztlanlibrepress.com. And if there are any educators out there that are interested in getting a courtesy desk or review copy, we do want to get this book into classrooms and schools throughout the US and internationally. You know, go to our website also, and we have contact information there, and we'll send you a courtesy desk copy for your review. And hopefully we can get this book into classes across the US in different subject areas. And also, Dr. Cintli, I know that you have an upcoming tour. You want to briefly mention some of the dates that you're going to be doing here in the US?
Yeah, I should have written it down. Well, it'll be out of memory. Well, on this Thursday coming up, no, I'm sorry. This Friday coming up will be in Tucson at the Revolutionary Grounds Cafe and Books. And that'll be at 7 p.m., 7 to 9 in Tucson. Again, Revolutionary Grounds Cafe. We're going to post it. I think you're going to post it on your site. I'll post it on my page.
Yeah.
You know, the next day, a good friend of ours, Sarko, he's an incredible historical figure. He'll be, he has a workshop, and we're going to be doing a taller. So we're going to be doing a book thing there also.
That's Saturday, November 13th at La Tontecali in Mesa, Arizona. In fact, I have it here on my phone, Dr. Cintli, that you sent me. So briefly, let me just mention, it seems like Thursday, November 18th, I think you're going to be at California State University at Channel Islands. Mm-hmm. And then Friday, the 19th November at Anahuacalmecac School in LA. And I think he's going to be with you at the Association of Raza Educators on that same day, you know, Friday, November 19th, right, Lupe, at Echo Park. Saturday at Tonali Studio, November 20th in East LA. Then they moved to Santa Monica on Sunday, November 21st at Pico Youth and Family Center. Sunday evening in Orange County, and Monday, I think the last one, I believe at San Diego State University, November 22nd. But we'll post it on our Aztlan Libre Press Facebook page and social media if you're interested here within the next couple of days. I know you're finalizing some of those dates, but most of them are already finalized, so we'll be posting those. Any final comments from anybody?
Well, what I wanted to say is that, again, I have to thank everybody here, because all of them, everyone here has been special in my life, not just the book, but my life. And I'm including Irene and Juan Gomez Quiñones, and of course, Angela. But I also, I know that we probably don't have that time, but I know that if Tanya perhaps could give a few words at the very end, you know, the equivalent of her closing meditation. Again, I don't think we have the full time for it, but at least a few words, Tanya. But before you do that, I don't know if everybody else might have a word or two.
Lilliana, anything? Lupe? I just on behalf of Anissa and myself and Aztlan Libre Press, I want to thank all of y'all for participating in this very stimulating conversation. I think it's very important. Lilliana, Lupe, Tania, and of course, Dr. Cintli, thank you for this. And it's an honor to publish this book with you and continuing our work. So I guess we can and all of you out there who tuned in and listened to this conversation here today and virtual book launch, thank you for tuning in. Tania, if you want to go ahead and take us out as you did with the book. Briefly.
Yes, thank you so much. Okay, so it'll be super brief. If you could please join me or keep your eyes closed or simply listen. Hands palm center, inhale fully. Exhale completely. Next exhale, join me with an Om. AUM sets a healing vibrational frequency, represents the beginning, the middle, and the end. Inhale fully. Om. Thank you for joining me in this healing space. I want to welcome you. Feel connected with your roots. It is here where you will find the truth. Inhale fully. Exhale completely. It is when we're connected, we connect with the universe to receive all the beautiful messages from our ancestors. It is here where you connect with Guadalupe, our Mother Earth. It is here where the healing happens, where you remove all the negative, all the violence, all the trauma. You create men, a Maya concept. This is where you let go of what no longer serves you. Inhale fully. Exhale completely. And it is here where your inner yogi comes out to fight and battle in this life. Next exhale, join me closing with an Om. Inhale fully. Om. With much gratitude and respect. Namaste. Om. Thank you guys.
Well,